Hello and welcome to another episode of the What Goes On podcast. This week we have the absolute pleasure of chatting to the lovely Ben Ellis, who has graced many a stage over the years with, I'm guessing, quite a few people. Stop doing that, Steve. He's pulling faces and putting me off, people. But Ben has played with many people, but one you may have heard of is someone called Iggy Pop. Is that not right, Mr. Ben?
Yeah, he's pretty up there near the top of the list of famous chaps I've stepped onto a stage with.
Yeah, there's not many people in the world that don't know about Iggy Pop.
Yeah. So how funny that gig? Yeah, it's the one that you tell your family and they know who you're talking about. Whereas
yeah.
For the past 20 years, it's been like, yeah, nice one, Ben. Great. Yeah. Yeah, back to making the tea, son. You know.
Yeah, keep grounded.
Yeah, that's it.
So, but yeah, where did it all start? Where did you first get into music? And when did it become a thing for you?
Oh, I was really lucky. My parents, I think my mum, when I was a little kid, when I was like 5 or 6, she had always wanted to play a musical instrument, but she's just not musical. And my old man was a piano player, like not sort of concert piano, but in music halls and stuff like that. He was an accompanist, like a professional accompanist, and also an electrician, which is kind of a funny mix of sort of geeky technical things and musical things, which is probably where I got a lot of my inspiration from. But my mum really wanted me to play the violin, so they kind of bought me a violin, and I started doing violin lessons when I was 5, and I was sort of too young at that point to realise that the violin is not a very cool instrument. Well, it is, but you get to that point in your sort of growing up, sort of in your adolescence, where suddenly playing the violin is a really crap thing to be doing, and then if you hang tough and stick with it, by the time you get to your 20s, I think it becomes really cool again.
Yeah.
But I touched the violin when I got to that point, and sort of started playing the guitar. And when I asked my parents for a guitar, they predictably went and bought me a bloody classical guitar, which is not what I wanted. So, I wanted a red and white Stratocaster, like that sort of thing. So I eventually got a Stratocaster and started playing the guitar. But then when I discovered the bass guitar, it was just one of those moments where it was like, oh, this is the noise I want to make. And I think part of that's because the bass, as well as it playing a melody, you can really feel it, like when you play the bass. So that was kind of where music sort of started for me. And then when I got into playing in bands, when I was younger, I just sort of tried to play in as many different genres of music. And I mean, as a bass player, I was probably, when I grew up in Glasgow, in like 5 or 6 bands at once at any given time, and just doing like really crap part-time jobs to try and make ends meet and get better at playing the bass. And then it just all sort of kind of snowballed from there. People put up with me for long enough playing it to get reasonably all right at it. I moved to London and met various people along the journey. But yeah, if you like the Stooges and Iggy's music as a teenager, like I remember when I first heard the Stooges, I had a mate that his name was Dale Trigger. What a great name, eh?
That is a really good name.
And he bought a mini, like a little mini, like the original, like the 70s one, when we were 17, and we used to drive. I grew up in a little town called Dumbarton, and we used to drive up to Glasgow in Dale's Mini and go out clubbing. I mean, it wasn't like clubbing. Like,
have we lost him?
Yeah, I think so. We were finding out about Dale and his Mini. Come on, come back.
Well, we need some hold music now.
It was like indie discos and that sort of thing.
He's back. He's back.
Hey!
We lost you. We lost you for about 30 seconds there. You were just driving out. We heard clubbing, and then we lost you after that. So, can you retrace those steps?
Yeah, so I was just going to say that when I was listening to the Stooges in my mate's Mini, if you'd have said to me at that point, I would have been playing in a band with the guy singing on that tape. Like 20 years later, I would just have been like, "Oh, you're daft." But like, it's funny how these kind of things sort of happen, and in a way, that Iggy gig when I started doing it, it just felt like absolutely the right thing for me. I had such a connection to the music already and to everything about him. So that's kind of how it happened. But with all sort of musical jobs, most of the really great ones, you never really sort of apply for them. They just sort of happen. I mean, some stuff you need to audition for and you send stuff off to people, but that was just through people I got to know, and they sort of thought, "Oh, you'll be a good guy to do this," and it's worked out great. It's been a really fun gig for me to do, and hopefully we'll do more of it. We'll see what happens after the Corona stuff, but yeah, it's great. I love it. I love him. I love
Glasgow has a really cool music scene, doesn't it? It's almost like a little bit of a Seattle, maybe. Because because it's not a huge town, and there are lots of really, really serious musicians. And from the tiny amount of time that I've spent in the scene there, it just seems like everyone knows everyone else across genres, if you want to say, and everyone's just encouraging everyone else. And it just seems like a good, if you want to get into music, then there are a lot worse places to grow up than Glasgow.
Yeah, it is great. I mean, I left Glasgow in around sort of 2002, but when I was growing up in my teens there were just some amazing bands. And like you say, there's maybe sort of 3 or 4 pubs that musicians go to, and you just meet everyone, like all of the people from the bands of that time, like Teenage Fan Club, Belle and Sebastian, Mogwai, AC Acoustics, Esca, who were a band at the time. There was the band I was in. We all saw each other on a weekly basis in those places and got together and slagged each other off and did gigs together. And it does. And because there's not a great deal, there aren't a great deal of resources, you do all end up lending each other bits of gear and like helping out. And it's really nice to have that. It's not too big. Like we're in London, like, depending on what bit of London you go to, it's so big you don't sort of tend to see the same people all the time. But in Glasgow, you definitely do. And I think at that time as well, when the music industry was so sort of London-centric, Glasgow was a wee sort of bubble on its own, so you could sort of develop a musical idea without being swarmed by 8 people after your second gig, you know. So people had more time to do their own thing and to develop that. And I think that's why you've got great bands like Arab Strap and Mogwai and these kind of bands that just don't sound like anything else, you know, which is one of the strengths of the city, definitely. But Glasgow, it can be a little bit parochial as well. I remember when I moved to London, people going, "Oh, you're selling out." I'm going to be on Talk of Pops next week, guys. Yeah, definitely, I'm selling out. Like, you know, there is a bit of that sort of attitude in Scotland generally, like, because we're, you know, England is like the big brother that we're not quite as good as that people have. Yeah. But Glasgow's a great place for me. Absolutely, yeah.
So when you were growing up and you were kind of, did you feel like you were looking at that scene from outside it when you were? Because I mean, we haven't kind of gone through what ages you were and what level of proficiency you had on your various instruments, but I'm guessing you were kind of early teens and maybe started going to gigs and that kind of stuff and started playing in bands. What can you kind of flesh out that part of your musical journey a little bit?
When I was 17, I left high school when I was 16 because I didn't really, I just wanted to do music. And my mum, bless her, saw this sort of college course at the time. And it was one of the first college courses that focused on sort of modern music. And the guy that looked after us was a guy called Almond and Breck, and it was a year-long course. And what they did was really magic. It had a sort of curriculum, so you got a national certificate at the end of it. I don't know if that's still a thing now. But what he did was he got a bunch of different musicians together at the beginning of the college course, and he made 5 bands. So there were like 5 drummers, 5 bass players, 7 or 8 guitarists, a couple of keyboard players and singers and such. And the idea, as well as doing the curriculum, they said we've got a recording studio at the college, so you'll learn a bit about recording, you'll learn a bit about all of these things that will come in handy, even like guitar maintenance, all that sort of stuff we learned about. But by the end of it, they wanted us to record a song, to release an EP. We released a 5-track vinyl EP that was sponsored by Sound Control and Tenants, and they split us into teams to like plug it to radio. We toured it. We got sponsorship to make it happen, like to record it, and we managed to get radio play and all that sort of stuff. It was really at that age.
It sounds amazing.
That sounds really good.
It was really good, and it was the first time anyone had really done that. I think that was the first year of it, and then maybe I'd done it a year before I did it, and it was really funny. It was in Springburn Technical College. So there was this one week. The rest of the college was all people learning to do either hairdressing or like carpentry or welding or stuff like that. And then there was this 1 week corner of like where all the freaks sat. And it was great, yeah. And it was a mixture of like young kids. I was 17 at the time, and then older guys. And some of the guys had just signed up for this music education course to get off the dole for a year and stuff like that. So you learned like loads of stuff, not just about music. You learned about life, and you met a lot of different people, and sort of got thrown in to make music together, and that was really fun. So that was a really sort of formative experience for me musically. And then after that, I just tried to be in as many different bands in and around that Glasgow scene as I could be. So I mean, I remember Mogwai doing I don't know if I was at their first Glasgow gig, but they did their first gig outside of Glasgow supporting the weird sort of math rock band that I was in at the time. And we were all about...
They supported you.
Yeah, that was like their first ever gig. I mean, I was probably 19 at that point, so they must have been like 15 or 16. I mean, they were kids, you know. We did this gig
amazing.
in a working men's club, Inverness Railway Club. It was a working men's club in Inverness, and they came up. And
what was the name of the band?
Motor Life Co. was the band that I was in at the time. We did a bunch of gigs around Glasgow. We never ended up doing much outside of Glasgow. They played a couple of the Bowley Weekenders, which were like All Tomorrow's Parties things before All Tomorrow's Party became a big kind of thing. But that was the band I kind of grew up with. And all the bands from that scene, I'm pretty sure Mogwai did it as well. We all recorded our own music and we made our own 7-inch singles. And most of us did. I mean, we did one Peel session. I think Mogwai did a bunch of different stuff, and all the other bands were part of that kind of group of bands that made like quite obtuse but pop music, you know, like noisy pop music, like Eska and Biss and these kind of bands. We were all playing in Nice and Sleazy's, the 13th Note, all these kind of same places at the same time. So it was a good little vibe. I'm still pals with all of those people. You know, I still talk to them on social media every so often. And they're all, loads of them, most of them for the most part, if they're not doing music, they're doing something else creative. But they're all doing stuff like Mogwai have their own record label now. They released the last Swervedriver album, which was an album that I was partly stuff to do with. So they're all still doing cool, fun and creative stuff. And it's really nice to see that happening as we're getting a bit older, you know, and seeing those bands. I remember when Belle and Sebastian released their first album, people were like, this is really weird. What is it? And now, like 6 or 7 albums down the line, they're really serious bands, you know, and it's really nice. I still remember Stuart from going out to the art school student union. We used to go to this night every Saturday called Divine that a mate of ours, Andy Divine, did, and he spanned Northern Soul 7 inches. And we used to go out to listen to that. And Stuart used to turn up, and then occasionally he'd go into the toilet and come back out in a dress, and then like all of this kind of stuff. Yeah, we were all just learning who and what we were at that time. It was great. It was really a nice way to grow up and still be in touch with all of those people now. So it's good. Yeah.
It sounds like an amazing scene to be in, you know, and the beginning of something, a whole movement almost.
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of good music came out of it, and a lot of that stuff at the time. Like, I think the thing that I was really into then was like the scene I wished I'd been part of was like the late 70s kind of punk rock scene in London. Like, I felt such a sort of attachment to that. And as I grew up, I met some of the people that were part of it, and you realise that a lot of those things do get sort of mythologized, and they're just for the most part, it's just sort of daft kids trying to do outrageous things. You know, and it's great. It's really, really, really great, you know. Did you see that the Damned have booked a bunch of gigs next year. That was a really formative album for me, the first Damned record.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
they're doing a bunch of gigs next year with the lineup, the original lineup that played on the first album, and it's 75 quid a ticket. I couldn't believe it when I saw that. Yeah, they're playing the Apollo thing. I think I'll probably go. Like, I don't think I can miss that one. But it's crazy that. But if you think about it, they were kind of the first punk band to release a record. I mean, it really is history, you know. But it's amazing that they've got to the point where they can legitimately charge 75 quid to go to a gig. It's mad.
Yeah, that is bonkers. So I guess Tony's going to be out with them, is he? Tony Bateman.
Yeah, I bet he is, you know. I bet he is, yeah. He said, I still haven't watched it, but he sent me a documentary of theirs that I need to, that's been on my list of things to watch over the lockdown period. That'll be one to look forward to.
We need to get him on here because I'm sure he's got a story or two.
Tony, yeah.
He's just, when you get him talking, like he's quite shy, but once he starts talking, it's like, don't stop. Like, just keep
absolutely.
Going.
Yeah, definitely.
And he's a great bass player, Tony, as well. Like, a lot of people don't really realise that. He's a fantastic musician. He's really good.
Really?
Yeah, he can really play the bass. He doesn't ever like show off. You know what Tony's like. Well, I'll just put that there. There's a. I mean, he was mates with Joss, who's one of Iggy's staple crew guys. But I met Tony on the Razor Light. And occasionally he'd turn up at the rehearsal room and be like, "Oh, this is a 1960s Rickenbacker that I've owned." And you're like, "What? Where did that come from?" A serious bass player, Tony's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard him play. I haven't heard him play bass actually, but at the guitar shop I kind of started at, he used to come in quite a lot and throw broken things at us. So when he was working for do you remember the band The Vines?
Yeah.
So he's working with them, and like my job, it felt almost weekly, was to rebuild the neck of this Strat that was just
smashed up. Yeah.
He used to throw them around a lot. Craig, the singer's name was, I think. I met him.
Yeah. I really like that album. But I heard him play the guitar, and it's just like, wow, you really can play.
Yeah. I've never managed to get out of Tony what bands he was in the 70s, but I bet you there's some fucking really cool ones in there. I bet. Like I've never managed to find out the history, but yeah, it'd be a good one to get to the bottom of actually. That ask him that if you get him on. That's like that'd be fascinating.
Yeah, that would be really cool. But back to you rather than anybody else. So when did you first start sort of seriously like touring and stuff and getting out there? I mean, it sounds like basically you've always done it, but when was like
off and on. My first tour was, funnily enough, with that bunch of miscreants I was in college with. Like we had this little college minibus and we went and played gigs all around Scotland. I mean, that's not sort of proper touring, but I joined a band called the Catherine Wheel in 2000, and they were way. Yeah, wow. Do you know those guys?
Smashing Pumpkins were big fans of you, weren't they?
Yeah, we did a bunch of gigs with Smashing Pumpkins. We supported them we played with them in Canada. There was a Canadian festival called Somersault, which was like Lollapalooza, and the Pumpkins were the headline band, and we were sort of. Catherine Wheel did better in Canada than they did anywhere else. I think we went on at kind of like 7 o'clock, and then there were also, can't remember who else was on about, a Perfect Circle.
I like them.
It was Smashing Pumpkins, a Canadian band called Our Lady Peace. But that's how we sort of got, and then we ended up doing the UK arena tour, which was like the Pumpkins farewell tour. We supported them doing that. But I met them in 2000, and that was one of those. It kind of basically, I was in Glasgow and it got to the millennium, and I think I was 24 or 25, and a lot of my friends that were doing sort of journalism stuff like that had like proper jobs. Like I had a girlfriend that was like a chief editor over there, and I sort of realised that I was having a great time making music in Glasgow. I was loving it, but I never ever made any money, and I always had these like really crap like jobs. Like at one point I worked in a call centre for a bank, and like I did like bar jobs, delivering flyers and all that. So I just sort of thought, had a bit of existential angst after the millennium, and I bought, at the time, the Melody Maker was a weekly newspaper, And in the back of the Melody Maker, they had all the musicians wanted ads. And you could tell if it was a signed band because they paid for a box. So they had a wee box ad. And the Catherine Wheel had put an ad in, and it just said, I can't remember what it said. It was something like, international artist seeks bass player for upcoming album release and tour. So I sent them, you had to send a picture and a demo of me playing on a Peel session or something like that. And they got me down. They rehearsed in Great Yarmouth, so I had to get the train down to Great Yarmouth. It was just funny. Like, I had no money at the time, and I had to phone up the management office from the train station. You know that thing that you used to be able to do, where you basically phone if your child gets lost. Some don't know, and they can get someone to phone up and buy your ticket. I had to get Sanctuary Music Management to phone Glasgow Central ticket desk to say I've got and they bought my train ticket by remote control, and I went on the train down to Great Yarmouth and spent the weekend there in a sort of garage lockup with the Catherine Wheel and did the audition, and then they asked me to do that. But that was amazing. That I think we rehearsed for a few weeks and then did a sort of 2-week club tour, which was the album launch, and then a 2-month sort of theatre tour, which was the first time I think I'd been abroad, but just on holiday and stuff like that. I'd never been to America. It was the first time I'd played to audiences that knew the words, and, like, a band that had actual fans. You know, I was used to playing to half-empty King Tuts, supporting some other dubious band. But that was really when I realised that's what I wanted to do every day, you know, and that band, I mean, they were such nice guys. They were all about 10 years older than me, and they just gave me a platform to play bass every night, and that was really where I learned how to be professional. And I say professional, semi-professional. Don't want anyone, always go in below where you think you should be. But they let me sort of, you know, stand up on stage with them and play, and whenever I got too wild on tour, they'd be like, you know, that that bottle and a half of whiskey you drank last night, Ben, maybe just one bottle was fine. You know,
can you put your finger on why they chose you over anybody else who they had come down to audition?
I think they had a sort of wall in that studio in Great Yarmouth that was a sort of wall of some of the more outrageous people that just you were just scratching your head about why they'd applied to be in an indie band. And I remember this guy from obviously an amazing African musician who was really into rootsy African music. And the thing that he'd sent on his CV that they used as a pun the whole time was, but it is an actual style of musical playing, was he was a master bassist. And they were like, this is the kind of people. So the sort of people that applied for the audition were like, some of them you were just like, they'd obviously just seen it was a box ad and it was a paid gig, and they just fire it off to anyone. And I think in the end it was down to me. There was a girl that was quite good and looked really cool, and I think there was a guy that looked really cool from Wales, and they got the guy in. And he looked the part and looked great, but when they got him in, he couldn't really play the parts properly. And I think the girl turned up and could play the parts properly, but the guys in the band were like, she's really attractive, and if we go on tour with her, we'll end up like...
It's going to be a mess, yeah.
So they gave the gig to Muggins here. And I think with those things, I have a friend who, a guy called Chris Dale, who ended up playing for Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden, who I met. He was my bass tech for a while on another gig, and we became
Bruce Dickinson.
Yeah. Oh, the singer from the Catherine Wheel, Rob, is Bruce Dickinson's cousin. Weirdly, there's a sort of funny Iron Maiden Catherine Wheel connection. They were both managed by Sanctuary. But Chris said the same thing, that when he applied for the Bruce Dickinson gig, it was the same thing. You sent away your photo and all that. And I think there weren't many people applied for it that were actually realistically going to get it. So I think with those kind of things, it was just like apply for it and turn up and be decent. And I was really cheeky to them when I came to do the audition. I remember the singer asking me in the audition, sort of saying, "Oh, what else do you do to make a living?" And I was like, "Well, I do a bit of journalism, I do a bit of bar work, I do a bit of everything." And he said, "Oh, you're a music journalist." Like, he obviously hated music journalists. "Are you a music journalist? You probably slagged us off at some point." And I said, nah, the Catherine Wheel, I'm not actually that old. I never really reviewed early records. And the rest of the band, the guitarist and the drummer, just loved that I was taking the piss out of him like, so early on. It was just me being a wee wide guy from Glasgow. And so we just had a laugh and just sort of got on. I think in those situations, I'd done so many auditions for little bands by that point that I wasn't nervous anymore in that situation. So, and being a bit kind of gobby, and especially when you're young, is probably something that's good in an audition. So many people probably come in and are nervous, and I wasn't. So I probably had that on my side for that kind of thing.
You're basically exuding confidence. That's what you were doing, and that is always attractive, I think, isn't it? Well, is it always? It's mostly attractive, even if you can't. I'm not going to be able to formulate my sentence to express my thought, but people gravitate towards confidence, and if you're going to watch a rock band, you want to see people being confident more often than not. So because if you're confident in yourself, then they're more likely to have confidence in you. If you don't believe in yourself, then why is anyone else going to believe in you?
Exactly. Who's going to want to come and watch someone like that play a gig? It's not a fun experience. I think as well for me, like, I just sort of like the idea of joining a bigger band. I was kind of naive enough when I went for the audition to not. I remember them when they were saying, "Oh, we're going to go on tour in America now." Me being like, "What? Like, for how long? For 2 months? What are you getting? Oh, wow, that's cool." Like, and I was naive enough to not really realise that was going to happen. So it didn't feel like there was a great deal riding on it for me. I just kind of went down to see what happened and sort of have a laugh, and that probably was in my favour as well. That would make me less nervous and more able to be myself. Maybe.
Whenever I've gone into an interview and not really wanted the job, you just get it. You know you're going to get it because you don't really care, and therefore you're more relaxed and more confident. And so, yeah, absolutely. If you absolutely desperate to have the job, then you're probably not going to perform that well. You got to hold your expectations lightly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that as well as a musician, when you're looking for, when you really need a gig as well, like when your band's been dropped by a label, or like, you know, when everything's gone to hell in a handbag and you're sort of phoning people up going, "Oh, do you know that thing you were talking about?" As soon as you're asking for a gig, you seem a bit needy and weird. Mm-hmm. It's like being attracted to someone too much. If you go on a date or something like that, as soon as people get a whiff of that feeling, they're just like, they want to run 1,000 miles. It's always better to not, to sort of not manage to not care about it somehow. I think that's why most musical jobs, like those really big gigs, like the Iggy gig and stuff like that, if you had to apply for it, you'd overthink it so much that you'd end up fucking it up. But when it just, you're told that's what you're doing, it's like, oh, you just kind of get on with it, don't you? Yeah.
So how did things progress with Catherine Wheel? And I guess at some point you left, or it ended, or whatever. No, before we go there, let's go on tour. How was touring?
Oh, that was great! What a laugh that was! It was just brilliant, just absolutely great. Like that, what a great way to see America for a start. Like, we started in New York and then got on a tour bus. And then every day, different city, and traveling like right across, up through the monster drive was like Phoenix to Salt Lake City, and that was all the way through the desert. And as a kid coming from Britain, you never see that kind of space. You just, it's like you drive for like 8 hours and you're still in the middle of nowhere. Like, it's just like plains, cliffs, desert. It's just mad. Like, I remember getting up, like being woken up by the motion of the bus in the morning and going and sitting down. There's a little seat, like riding shotgun opposite the driver, right in the front of the bus, and just watching the sun come up over the desert. Suddenly, the Eagles' music makes sense. Stuff that you just like haven't ever, just been like, I don't understand that, I hate it. You put it on, and suddenly Freebird, it's like, right, okay, I get it. Yeah. That experience was really fantastic. And also just being the sort of youngest new member of a signed like band who were kind of famous in America was really mental. Like that whole. I think the second gig we did, the first gig I was totally shitting myself. It was in Seattle. That was the first gig actually.
No pressure.
Yeah, it was. I remember we came up to the gig in a cab because we'd been somewhere for dinner, and the cab pulled up outside, and the guys in the band just screaming, keep driving, because there were like however many 1,000 people in the queue. And actually, I don't think that gig wasn't thousands, that was maybe like 500 or 600. But that just felt mental, having to be bundled in through the back door so that the fans couldn't get hold of us. And then doing the gig, and we did all right. I remember about halfway through that gig, I didn't make any mistakes. And I remember the singer, who was a rhythm guitarist, dropping a real clanger in one of the songs and just feeling like, oh, great.
It wasn't
someone
me.
Else's yeah. That was the overwhelming emotion at the end of that first gig that I got through. I don't think I was excellent, but I got through it without dropping any howlers, and it was fine. And then the next night we were in LA, and I can't remember if we flew to LA from Seattle. I think we did. It was all like really early airport calls, and then we played in the Troubadour, which is a famous little sort of venue on it's on Sunset Boulevard. It's somewhere around there. It's in Hollywood. And at the end of the set, like we played the set and then went off into the dressing room and then came back on to do an encore. And there were these sort of young Asian women just in front of there's no barrier in there in front of my mic stand. And as the singer was talking before we played the first song in the encore, one of them was like, oh, like sort of going like for me to go bend down. And I remember bending down at the foot of the mic stand, and she just grabbed my shirt and started snogging me. Like, and that was my second. And after the gig, and I was totally like, wow, what just fucking happened there? And after the gig, the drummer saying, never pay attention to the fan. Don't, if they tell you to do that, just don't. Because I think they had to wait until I managed to get back up before they could start the song. And it was like, but that for like a little kid from Glasgow who'd second gig in America, it was like Wonderland. Like I just couldn't believe that it was happening. It was like it felt like being in the Beatles or something like that. It was just ridiculous, But that sort of was that sort of two in life. But it was mental. It just was mental. But I think the thing that got me through it most of all was like every night the gig was great. Like, it was like, if you were knackered, it was a difficult day or whatever. Every night when you played, it was just magical. So that, even when you're playing in the worst venues or the tiniest tour ever, the gig is always the thing that gets you through it. And as long as you can make that great, then you're sort of doing vaguely the right thing, That's the most important thing to get right, I think.
Yeah. And playing in another country is odd, isn't it? Because it feels almost like you've started inhabiting somebody else's life.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, I'm me and I kind of look the same and I sort of feel the same. But I've been transplanted into this parallel universe and I'm doing all of these weird things. I'm in America, so I feel like I'm in a movie or on TV.
Yeah.
It's like it's so odd.
Yeah, it absolutely was that. It was like being in a film about someone else going on tour, and it was all happening. That's exactly what it felt like. Yeah, it was really mad. And then because when we came back to Britain, it was all very much just go home and then go down the shops and see your pals and do whatever you do. That definitely was a different life in the States. It felt like a different thing. Yeah.
How did it feel when you did come home and it was like you were just sat on your couch, watching telly and all doing normal everyday stuff? I mean, how was the come down?
Heavy. I mean, it definitely was a period of adjustment. I wish then there had been more focus on that experience. I mean, there's a lot of people talking about mental health for musicians and how to adjust from being on tour to not being on tour, and how to kind of deal with it, because you do miss that adrenaline rush every night. You do miss the excitement 100%. I mean, I'm quite a sort of cheery person generally, so I never really got depressed. I probably, like most people that age, drank a bit much when I got home, like wanting to go out and get that same sort of buzz from playing gigs. That was the way I did it. Like I'd go out with my friends on the weekend and probably cane it a bit too hard. I mean, I think that was the main kind of downside for me from that. But to be honest, I was just having such a great time as a musician, and you know, and then like a couple of weeks later, the manager would call and be like, "All right, next week we're going to go to," and then you're like, "Woohoo!" That was it. And I was still in bands in Glasgow at that point, like trying to make music at home and do interesting things at home as well. So that kind of kept me going. But it is a difficult thing for everyone. I think I've been doing it for years now, so I'm sort of used to it, and I have things I do to kind of cope with coming off tour. But for
what do you do? What do you do? We need to know.
I just try and keep focus. I try and have things that I do. I try to not make them separate lives. So when I come on tour, I try and, if I'm doing some sort of musical project at home, I try and bring it on tour. And if I have a day off somewhere, if I'm not knackered, I'll try and work a wee bit on that and try and record a wee bit of that. Or if I'm writing something or doing that, I just try and keep it a continuum between life at home and life on tour. And I find that really helps. And coming home for the first couple of days after tour, I just try and not plan anything. Just try and have a few days to recover physically, which when you're younger, you don't really need to do so much. And then to just stay engaged in the creative projects that I have that are separate from that band that I'm working on. Maybe not always separate, but that definitely helps me. And a few years ago, I stopped drinking altogether. I had a bit of a problem with alcohol that built up over years of just constantly touring and just having a drink now and again, every day really. So that even when I had days when I wasn't drinking, I still had a couple of drinks with dinner or whatever. And it crept up on me very gradually that I realised I kind of had a problem with it. And when I stopped drinking, that all became a lot easier. There was a lot less kind of I found the swing between having had a few drinks and being like ecstatically happy and dopamine high, and then the hangovers, the extreme swings in emotion were kind of too much for me. So that really helped me. But everyone has their own journey with that sort of thing. But that definitely was a help for me, like to be more even generally.
Yeah,
that I think was helpful for me to do that.
And I think that's something that we've kind of heard from lots of different people in different ways, that there has to be that, like, you're bound to have extremes on tour and off tour, but if you allow them, or you kind of push them if you push the extremes on tour, then it may well go the opposite extreme when you come off tour. So you need to try and, like you say, there's an overlap of off-tour life and on-tour life creatively, and there's kind of got to be an overlap in the way that you're living your life as well. You know, what you're eating, how you're sleeping, as much as possible on tour, how much you're drinking, the people that you're talking to, all of those kind of things, because otherwise it is just like a parallel life, and it feels a bit like off-tour turns into a standby state, and you only feel like you're coming alive when you're going on tour, which is it can't be healthy.
Well, it's kind of dangerous, I think. And what I definitely did when I was younger, when I came back from tour, was not want to give up that sort of mentality of partying every night. Because you would go and you would do the gig, and then after the gig, you'd meet people, you'd go out, you'd kind of go exploring in cities with new people that you'd never met. And that was all incredibly good fun. But you can't do that in Glasgow every night. It's just like, you know, and I don't think anyone really spoke to me about it at the time, but when we're all sort of young in that age, people are kind of wrapped up in their own worlds. But I probably could have spent less time, you know, being the last person to leave the Nice and Sleazy's or whatever or every night. And if I'd had someone around to kind of go, are you realising what you're doing here? It might have helped. But equally, I was such a gobby little prick. What are you talking about, Grant? You don't have a clue what you're on about. Like, if I heard myself then, now, you know, I probably wouldn't have listened anyway, you know. And it was all okay for me, you know. I've been quite blessed through my life with meeting people that have been really helpful with all the various things that I've been through. But I do. There's a lot more focus on that sort of mental health thing now for young people going on to it, and I think that is a really positive thing. Because when you're in that whirlwind of being in a band that are big and they're just breaking and stuff is happening, it's mad. I mean, it really is. it's what you've dreamed about since you've been about sort of 13 or 14, and for it to happen, it's really difficult to manage, and it's really difficult to know that other people have been through it and that life continues after it. Because when your first band's kind of stopped, like, I remember when the Catherine Wheel stopped, the whole band's kind of stopped, and they sort of got dropped by the label. It was just a bit of like, I mean, that was my whole life. What do I do now? You know, I never thought while it was happening that it might end at any point, and end so suddenly. And that's one thing as a musician who's been doing it for years, that you learn that all of these fantastic things that you're doing, you know, one day you can be playing to 5,000 people, the next day you can be playing in a pub, if you can get a pub gig, you know. So it's very much like big things stopping and starting all the time, which has made this sort of coronavirus thing interesting, because obviously everything is stopped. I've actually wondered if people that work in music, like yourselves, or techs, or musicians who are part of that touring environment, in some ways I think we are almost better equipped to deal with it than people who do sort of more regular jobs all the time, because all through your life as an adult musician or a technician, you're used to these things. Everything's great. Oh, this has happened and the band stopped. You know, it happens. So, and you just immediately, you're like, what can I do to make the rent this month? What can I do to make things work? And that's kind of what we've all had to deal with this time. And for a musician or for a technician, it's not that foreign to have to do this, you know, all the time. It's just part of the breaks, isn't it? Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. You just have to find the next thing, you know, that's it.
Yeah. So
that's very true. If it's like lots of like people who are on a wage and do 9 to 5s, it's a lot more treadmill-y. Yeah. Whereas when you're running your own business, or if you're a kind of gun for hire, for want of a better expression, or you're in a band, or that kind of thing that stops and starts, you're aware that it can stop. And I think as human beings, we have a tendency to believe that something that's gone on for as long as there's a certain period of time, and depending on what kind of aspect of life it is, you just assume that it's going to carry on like that forever, because it has gone on like that forever. Yeah. And then suddenly when it comes to an end, we throw our hands in the air and run around in circles. Like as musicians and small business owners, we have run around in circles with our hands in the air on a daily basis for the last 20 years. I've done it 3 or 4 times a day already.
Yeah. I think I should
like when you wire a voltage switch the wrong for the first time in 700.
Yeah, that's definitely a hands in the air moment. Yeah. I should maybe make it part of my bass tuition curriculum to learn how to play bass like this.
Yeah.
That would be a bonus.
Yeah.
Subscribers only.
Yeah. That's a special content right there.
So what did you do after Catherine Wheel kind of ground to a halt then? Oh, that metaphor kind of works. After Catherine Wheel ground to a halt, fizzled out. How about that? Ooh. Yeah. 5th of November, baby. I can't believe it taken me so long to get there.
I'm fully on board with this. Yeah. I was quite lucky that they were part of this massive management company called Sanctuary. And Sanctuary had a bunch of different bands. Sanctuary were the band that broke Iron Maiden in the States. And then so they kind of became this massive management music company. They looked after a whole bunch of bands. But there was another band that used to be called 3 Colors Red, and their singer and drummer had just formed this new thing. And they were managed by one of the other guys in the Sanctuary office. So they quite quickly got me to play bass for that. And that was sort of relatively short-lived. I think that went on for like maybe 9 months or something like that. And it was really nuts. At that point, there was still quite a lot of money in the music industry. And I was living in Glasgow, and they would fly me down to London on a Monday morning. I'd do Monday to Friday in rehearsals with them, working up songs for the album. And then on Friday, they'd fly me back to Glasgow. So I got to spend the weekend with my pals. And I stayed in a really posh hotel in Kensington.
Oh, wow.
So that was my life. I mean, it was pretty dry that whole time. But I mean, it was a lot. It just felt ridiculous. And I got paid more to do that than I got paid the whole time I was touring in the Catherine Wheel, which felt kind of mad. But so I did that for a few months. And then after that, I can't remember what I did. I was in Glasgow for a while, and I played off and on with a bunch of different bands. And then in 2002, which would have been about a year after Catherine Wheel broke up and after the Three Colours Red thing sort of fizzled out, a girl that had worked in the Sanctuary office was working for this company, funnily enough, who you've been talking to, who had signed Muse in the UK. And they were called, yeah. And they had a band that they were trying to break called Seraphim. And Seraphine's bass player had just left, and they had a gig booked in at South by Southwest, which is the big music sort of conference thing in Texas, in Austin, Texas. So they needed a bass player to do this South by Southwest gig where they were going to like showcase music for a potential deal. So I came down to London and stayed on people's couches and did about 2 weeks of kind of little sort of toilet gigs around London. I can't remember where they were, like warm-up gigs. And then we went to South by Southwest. And at South by Southwest, we played this really intense sort of 40-minute set in some sort of ranch rodeo-themed bar somewhere. I mean, during South by Southwest, that's the venue that you could squeeze a band into becomes a music venue. And that band were really intense live. It was really kind of hard, garagey punk rock, loud punk rock. And there was a bidding war after that gig at South by Southwest, and we signed to Elektra Records. And then that was the next 5 or 6 years for me playing bass in Seraphim. And we made a record in Sunset Sound in LA with Dave Stardy. And I mean, I had an incredible experience with that band as well. And we were all about the same age and kind of learning how to bring a band from the very beginning to you know, making videos and touring all over the world and all that sort of thing. So that was kind of the next part of my musical development, being in that band. It was great fun. Chaotic as hell, mental. Like, yeah, they were proper heads, a few of the people in that band. But it was great, you know, and that was more just building on that experience of playing every day and just being a great rock and roll bass player, you know.
Yeah, man. So, how is it? I mean, because I guess you didn't know the guys before you came in or anything. I mean, how did it take long for you all to lock in together?
Well, yeah. I mean, we had certain things in common. I think when you first join a band, you sort of establish musical things that you all really love, and then that becomes a sort of reference point for you to build on things with ideas. I mean, initially with that band, it was just like, you need to learn these songs and be able to play them at a kind of performance level. And for that band, it was a lot about the intensity. The singer was very kind of a little really pretty Peruvian guy who kind of stood in the middle with the guitar, and me and the guitarist just kind of went mental, like I pair him up and see the side of him. So it was kind of presenting this like really wild thing, and this sort of bass references I had at that point. Like, I mean, I still love like John Entwistle, Jean-Jacques Burnel, like that big, really valve overdriven kind of bass sound that's on a lot of those kind of late 70s, early 80s records that I'm really fond of. And it was just trying to establish that as being that this is what I want to bring to the band. And we all agreed that was a great thing. And then people have the guitarist was really into kind of Sun Ra and some kind of weirder, trippier stuff, so we got really into that, and just going on a musical journey together. I think that's the thing that sort of bonds you together first in a band, that sort of musical thing. And two of the guys were from New Zealand, which is a small country kind of at the edge of the world, which felt like it had a few parallels with Scotland about having a really interesting music scene as well. So we kind of bonded about things like that. And there's nothing like having to get together as a little gang to play to an audience, right, to like really make no one else, you know, in those little gigs where you're playing to like 200 or 300 people, if that, it's you and against the world. The four of you or the six of you, or however many of you there are, you need to be tight and you need to be strong together, because no one else is going to give a shit about it. You know, if you play crap, the audience will just walk away. You need to reel them in, and having to do that together and depending on each other to do that. It's the start of a real bonding experience, I think. Every band goes through that, I think, at some point.
So those kind of gigs that you're talking about with a couple of hundred people, would those be support gigs then? Because you're talking about audience walking away. You presumably supported other bands, and then just had to keep people's attention.
Yeah, we did a bunch of support stuff, and then the most enjoyable gigs, support gigs we supported Frank Black, who's the singer from the Pixies. Yeah. And he had a solo project called Frank Black and the Catholics. And we also supported Muse, we supported Feeder, I can't remember, Biffy Clyro we supported. And all those gigs were all right, but the best support gigs were with Frank Black, and it felt like his audience, with the sort of bigger gigs, like when you play with a band like Feeder, they're bigger audiences, but a large percentage of that audience just come to hear the song they've heard on the radio. So they're not really music fans, they're Feeder fans or pop fans of that band. So as far as the support's concerned, apart from a small group of kids that want to go crazy to anything down the front, you're basically playing to a bunch of people who are like, fuck off. When can I hear the hit single by my favourite band? But with Frank Black's audience, they were a bit older and they were music fans. So it really felt like, even although in that tour, the biggest audience was maybe 1,000, it felt like every night we were winning people over. And they were loving it, you know, and they really got into how irreverent and intelligent that band was. Whereas with those other gigs, a lot of the times as a support band, you're kind of banging your head against a brick wall. The amount of people that you're going to convert is not particularly high. But the way we did it with that group was just with the singer, Ben Smith, he was a great songwriter and the songs were really strong. But we did it just by energy. I mean, the amount of support gigs we did where we just, at the end of it, we just trashed everything. Like we would smash the drum kit. If we felt that we hadn't got enough of a reaction out of the audience, we just smashed everything up, and that made them go. We definitely got a reaction that
on a Feeder gig. I bet that went down well.
Yeah, they hated us. They absolutely
I bet they did.
Yeah, they didn't like. They did. I think they invited us on tour because they heard the song. They didn't realise the absolute chaos bus that they were bringing into their world. They didn't like us at all, and we didn't react. We were very snotty at the way we reacted to that. But you know, a bunch of sort of really stupid rules that we weren't allowed to eat in the same room as them, and all this funny.
What?
Yeah, there was a lot of weird hierarchical stuff. I think their tour manager was a bit like strict, and that's fair enough. But when you try and apply that sort of those rules to like a bunch of like mid-20s punk rockers, it's just going to have the opposite effect, and that's what happened. I think they wanted to kick us off the tour, but they couldn't because we bought onto it. So they had to put up with us. You know, bless them. I'm sure I never really got to know them that well, but I'm sure I hear they're lovely guys. But yeah, they had to put up with us on full rebellion mode for that tour. And that was just the kind of way that band worked. You know, it wasn't until later that we started making things where we actually played them at a reasonable volume and a reasonable speed. But that early album and those early gigs were all about, let's go on stage and let's just blow everyone away. And if we can't do it by the force of the music, let's do it in a really bratty room. We'll just trash stuff at the end of the gig. And you get good at smashing things up though. Like, I mean, I still have like that bass there is one of the basses I played. Can you see that one? It's a little bit. It's one of the basses I played at that time, and the amount of drum kits I've battered to hell with that thing. And you get good at smashing stuff up so that you don't break it. you can use it the next night. Like your mate from the Vines you're talking about. It sounds like he hadn't quite got the hang of that.
No, definitely not. It was that guitar. By the time I'd finished, I think he actually got eventually. Tony sorted out replacement.
He bought another one.
No, they kept the same body. It just got replacement neck. But by the time it got to that point, all the heel of the neck was largely resin.
Yeah. I had a bass guitar, the same thing with the head. I smashed the head off it, thrown it through a drum kit, and then for the next 10 years, it was just getting it glued back together when it fell apart. And eventually, like you say, it was more glue than it was wood, and I just had to get a new neck for the bass in the end. But yeah, but you do learn to like when you're throwing a guitar over your shoulder, to let in the last bit when it's coming down, just let it fall, don't smash it, right? And then no, it's difficult to smash up a precision bass. I've tried a few times, but I've never managed to properly be able to do it. They're sturdy, you know. You could probably wreck a guitar pretty easy, but a precision bass, I think, you would struggle with. Definitely.
Yeah. I wonder if you learn how not to smash a guitar if you can't afford to keep on repairing it.
Yeah. Well,
because Matt Bellamy, apparently he would just go through guitar after guitar after guitar when they were buying them from Manson. He subsequently bought the company. That seems like a bit of a sledgehammer solution to that problem, but maybe he just never had to pay. You know, it wasn't a big deal to him to have to pay to repair them. So he was just like, well, I'm just going to. Every day I smash one up, it comes back the next day, and it's like I've got a new one. So why won't I smash it?
It's like becoming really good friends with your bank manager. Like, it's so good. You don't know where this come from. It's like,
self-healing guitar.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So when how did Seraphim come to an end then? Because presumably it did, or did you just destroy each other enough?
We did.
Guitars and drums.
I think the second album, the first album did really well, and then the second record was very different. The singer sort of had a little bit of a moment where he fired the original drummer and he fired the manager. And then when we got his brother in to play drums, who was just really, really a different drummer, like a very different style of drumming. It wasn't so hard and much more musical. But the second record really sounded nothing like the first album. So I think that we kind of struggled to get anyone to pick up the second record, and then that just kind of sort of fizzled out on its own. I think the gigs we started doing just got smaller and smaller, and then it just became like this is a sort of meandering thing. And I left in the end because it just felt like a bit of a thankless task. It was time to kind of go off and do something else at that point. And then I just sort of started playing with lots of different bands in London and doing sort of various different sessions, which was interesting. Like I had to learn. I'd previously been a very rock and roll bass player, and that was my thing. I was quite tunnel vision about that. And then I just sort of had to start learning how to play. Electronic music was really in vogue at that sort of point. I played in an electro band for a while. I played in a blues band for a while. I did a lot of different sessions, played some sort of pop music and stuff for a while, like loads of different stuff. And that was a real sort of time when I sort of grew a lot as a musician. And I wasn't touring as regularly, but I started getting into doing live sound at that point as well, which was was really interesting. Like, I learned so much doing that as a musician, you know, like learning all of these sort of technical things that I never thought, I never considered I would have done before. But it became.
And was that curiosity? Was that curiosity that got you into that, or necessity?
A bit of both. I'd taken during a bit of a lull in sort of bass playing work, I took a job in a studio in East London called The Premises. And I was just the guy that sort of sets up the room for people coming in. It was an easy enough thing to do. And then at one point, maybe about a year or two into doing that, one of my friends who was promoting gigs in a pub, their sound engineer had disappeared or got drunk or something. And she phoned me up in a panic going, look, we've got this gig and no one here can do the sound. I know you work in a studio. Can you come down and do the sound for me? I shudder to think what that gig sounded like. But I remember at the time, the studio were paying me like, I think it was like 50 quid cash in hand for a shift. And I sort of thought, oh yeah, I'll come down and do that. And I went down and it wasn't that different to setting up a vocal PA for a band in a rehearsal room. And they paid me 70 quid, gave me a free pizza and free drinks. And I'm kind of like, hang on a minute. I don't have as much money again, and I get fed, and I get to have a few beers. This is great. And then I sort of, it was just in a little pub in King's Cross called The Star. And they were trying to make the basement into a proper gig. I mean, it was never going to be a proper gig, that place. The PA wasn't good enough. But as an engineer, sort of learning how, like what a compressor does, for example, or like how to cue a kick drum, it was invaluable because there was no pressure, you know, to make it sound like anything other than what it sounded like in the room. And then from that, I started asking friends who were working in sort of slightly nicer venues if I could come and shadow them. Like a couple of really good mates of mine, Joe Hawley, who's a really superstar sort of touring front of house engineer, and Sergio Maschezzo, who's a Idol's monitor guy now, but they both were the main technicians in a venue called the Lexington.
Oh.
And the Lexington, a great little PA system and a really nice console. And I went in and shadowed Sergio for weeks, you know, and it was just learning, watching him work as on a personal level as well. He's really great with people, and learning how to get stuff to sound good and how to pull a mix together properly on a PA system where you can actually hear the difference, you know. Whereas in that little pop, it's like, you know, just about getting the vocal above the band really most of the time. And that was kind of the start of my education as a sound engineer. And then it just became another thing I could do. I think for musicians now, like back in the day when I started playing with the Catherine Wheel and Seraphim, you could have one gig. When you signed to a record company, it meant you had a wage, you got an advance, you could get a nice flat or whatever, and that would last you for a year or two, and that would be fine. But I think most musicians now, we all need to do other things, especially at the moment. Like the moment, you know, I'm teaching a little bit, I'm doing remote sessions for people, I'm doing bits and bobs of live sounds for people, and it's just become another sort of part of the sort of musical harmony that I can use to make money when the bass playing gigs are not so frequent. And the great thing about doing live sounds, on a few occasions it's happened that I've started off working with an artist as their engineer and then ended up playing bass on stuff as well, because they're like, oh, we need something to come in. You do that. Like I was really lucky in that I had a really fantastic spell when I got the gig playing with Iggy Pop. The same year, Swervedriver, who are one of my favourite guitar bands ever, asked me to play bass for them. Anna Calvi, who's my favourite female singer, asked me to go on tour as her front of house engineer. And it was kind of like, but it's my favourite guitar band, my favourite singer, and my favourite punk. And it was just mad, like all these things. I had to at the end of the year go, what am I going to aim for now? You know, how can I get better than this? But with Anna, we just met. I was doing sound for Rough Trade East. They do the in-store gigs there at Rough Trade, and Anna had a solo gig there, and we just really got along, and I did sound for that, and then she booked a little solo tour around Europe, so we went off on tour like the Odd Couple, like a couple of weeks around sort of France, and it was great, and I've always been such a fan of her music. And then when she was doing this sort of Peaky Blinders soundtrack, she did the soundtrack for all of the last season, she did all the music for it.
Oh, wow.
There were a few things that she wanted live drums and bass on, so I went into the studio with her drummer and her and played bass on that. So it's been interesting how all of these kind of worlds have interacted, and how it's for a long time all I really wanted to do was be this great rock and roll bass player. And over time, as I started doing more things, these other possibilities kind of opened up, and I think it is really important as a technical person, or as a business, running a small business, or as a musician, or doing anything creative, that you're constantly trying to learn new stuff. Because every time you do and you start getting good at it, all of this stuff, like it was like when I started getting good at live sound and realizing where the bass fitted into the mix that you're doing and how all this stuff works and how the frequencies interacted, it was like this whole sort of thing opening up, going, well, if I do that on the bass, I can become much better at that. You know, I can turn up at a gig already sounded, the engineer doesn't need to do anything to the bass because it already sounds the way they would want it to sound, rather than turning up and them having to do loads of work on the bass sound because it's not right, you know. So all of that stuff for me has been really sort of symbiotic and worked together to become a better sort of musical entity, if you will, without sounding like a total wanker. But it's all sort of interacted. And in this world where you probably can't, as a creative person, make a living just doing one thing, having all these other things that you can do, or if it's a bit quiet this month, doing that, or we'll go on tour with someone doing live sound. But it is, all of my musician pals, a load of people like play drums and do studio recording or do, there's not many people who play bass to a good standard and do live sound. It's quite a weird skill set that I've managed to develop, but it's just happened the way it's happened for me, and that's been one of the things that I've just kind of gone with it as much as I possibly could.
Yeah.
If people keep wanting to buy me pizza, That's great. It's all good. It's all a good thing.
Yeah, there you go. But actually, on that thing, but making your bass sound cool, so the sound engineer has to do as little as possible. Are there any key that you could pointers for people, myself included, things you would recommend to do?
I think well, recently the thing that's really opened my eyes is recording at home. And if you've got like a Mac or like a PC or something like that, and you can download Pro Tools or Logic or even GarageBand, it's just, I mean, it's just a slightly less fancy interface, but it's the same signal processing basically. And if you just have your bass amp or whatever, or DI your bass at home and start playing along to things that people send you, or your own compositions, or just records you like, and listen to the sounds you're making. It's kind of like, why is the bass on the record? Why does that sound like a record? And why does the sound I'm making sound like like a madcap running up and down a banjo? And when you really sort of start to focus in on these things and improve them, that's really when you go from being good to being exceptional, I think. And most of those it's really small percentages, like using the right compressor. It's like 2, 4, 5% of the total sound that you're making. I mean, you still need to play the thing, and that's something you can always improve on as well. But I think when you actually start hearing back the sound that you're making and trying to improve it and seeing results in that improvement, that's when you'll turn up at a gig and you'll have the front of house guy, if it's an in-house guy, or your own engineer, if it's the band you're working with, going, wow, the bass sounds really great today. And that's when you know, because those guys, they hear like 50 different bass players a week. You know, they're not going to tell you it's great if it's crap. So once you start getting that kind of response out of like really hardened front of house engineers with mullets and pot bellies going, wow, bass sounds great, mate, then you're doing a pretty decent job. But I definitely recording yourself and listening to the sound you make is the first step with trying to improve it. I mean, when I listen back to like, I mean, it's never horrendous. I guess some of it maybe is. But when I listen back to the kind of noise I was making as a bass player in the sort of early noughties, a lot of it is just enthusiasm and energy over sort of technical ability and actual tone. Although there were always things that I knew I loved, and I always knew I loved valve amps. That was always a thing that from the very beginning, the first time I tried, like, I had an old Fender Bassman 100 head that I got, that a mate had as a guitar, and I remember recording bass through it, and it just suddenly sounded much better. And I was kind of like, that's going to come everywhere with me. And then when I found the precision bass, that was another thing. It was like, this noise is something that I agree with wholeheartedly. So I think just finding those things that you love, you know, and finding that one thing that becomes your sound, and then going off and blowing all of your money on all of that. Change that. Like, how can I make it more interesting? I'd say that's definitely a start. And even sometimes when you get recorded as a live musician, if you can get the engineer at the gig you're doing, if it's easy enough for them to just record a left, right of the show, so you can hear the noise that you're sending to the PA. And sometimes when you listen back to it, it's a bit like, oh God, you don't want to hear it. But if that's how you feel listening back to your live recording, you've just played to like however many hundred people in the room sounding like that. So it's definitely worth your while doing it, even if it is a little bit painful and you don't sound like, because sometimes the way you imagine it sounds and the way it actually sounds are slightly slightly apart.
Divergent.
Yeah, and just bringing those worlds together and dealing with the reality of the noise that you're making is great. You know, it's because then you become that player that you always kind of wanted to be.
And I think it's like you say, you always want to be learning. And if you always want to be learning, then the question that you probably ought to be asking yourself is, what am I supposed to be doing? Like when you turn up to the Catherine Wheel gig, it was like, what am I supposed to be doing? I'm supposed to be, firstly, I need to be able to play the songs. And then once I can do that without making a fool of myself, then you say, well, now what am I supposed to be doing? I can do that. Now what am I supposed to be doing? Well, I'm supposed to communicate with the audience, I need to slot into my piece of the sound spectrum even better. So how can I do that? And it just seems like you're always asking, okay, what am I supposed to be doing? How can I improve and improve and improve and be more useful to anyone who I'm going to play with?
Absolutely.
That's basically a recipe for life, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you start doing anything, you maybe don't realise, like I certainly didn't when I was in the Catherine Wheel, I didn't consciously ask myself any of those questions, you know. It was like, how can we finish the gig and get to the bar the quickest? And where are the attractive people in the audience? And all those kind of things that you're obsessed by when you're a touring musician in your 20s. But I think if you on some level, you must have some sort of curiosity about that. And as you get older and realise, why did people want me to do that? And then when I've done that, that's not worked so well. Then you start more consciously asking yourself those questions, which is helpful. But then again, with everything, you can sometimes overanalyze stuff, like overcook it a little bit. And it's always good to remember as a musician or anyone else doing anything creative, that the reason you're at the level doing it that you are is because at some point people love what you do, and you've got to own that and be aware that exists, no matter how much you fiddle with it and how much you change it and improve it. There's something in there in that initial sort of recipe that's great, you know, and don't, you know, I think whenever I've given a few lectures now, and whenever I've done it, one of the things that I try and say to all the musicians is that you will go through these times when you can't get a gig to save your life. Every time you go to try out for a band, someone in the room hates you, or stuff doesn't work out, or you don't play well that day, or, you know, you can go months without really feeling that you're making progress. And it's just during those hard times, don't stop. Just keep going, keep working away, because you're good at it, and eventually something will fall into place. And before you know it, like someone will phone you up and ask you to play for Iggy Pop or something mad like that, you know, and that will happen. You know, I mean, definitely before that gig happened, I was thinking that my career and my life was going to go more in the direction of doing live sound, because that was a more regular gig for me. It was less hassle. I didn't have to drag a bass amp around, you know, and I was getting older. I think I was definitely approaching my 40s when I started doing that gig. And I was kind of thinking, well, this is probably, I'll still keep playing for fun and with friends and stuff, but I'm probably not going to do anything that really big. And then I got that mad phone call to go and do that gig, and then everything kind of flipped, you know. And
how did that happen? How did that happen? Where did the phone call come from?
It was from the MD of that band is a guy called Kevin Armstrong, and he's a really amazing musician and guitarist. And he played with Iggy in the 80s. His first big gig was playing with David Bowie. He was part of the musical lineup that did Live Aid with Bowie when they played, and he recorded the Absolute Beginners album. So he, about a year, maybe it was longer than a year before he called me about the Iggy gig, he had put someone on Facebook. I didn't know him at the time. He put someone on Facebook saying, we need a real, like, proper rock and roll bass player for this one-off gig in London. Does anyone have any recommendations? And a bunch of different people got tagged in the comments, saying, oh, have you met this guy? And a mate of mine, a guy called Mike Audley, who I'm forever thankful to, he worked for Taste Media, who signed the band that I was in, Seraphim, it was a company that Muse were signed to as well, early days. Mike wrote, and he was a good friend of Ken's, wrote in his comments going, Kev, I don't know exactly, but it's something along the lines of, please forget all these other clowns. This is the guy you need. Tagged me in the thing. So I wrote back going, oh, Mike, that's very kind of you. And wrote to Kevin going, if you want to meet up and have a sort of jam and tell me a bit more about it, that would be great. And at the time, I was on tour with this guy called Tristan Mackay, who's a really fantastic blues player. And I was playing blues in his kind of blues band. And I think we had our final night in Leeds. We played some theatre in Leeds. And then the next day I was going to get the train down to London to do this gig with. So Kev said, yeah, come in and do it. Here are the songs. And they sent me these really weird, super art rock, kind of like Frank Zappa-esque weird time signature songs. So I had to learn these songs on the train from Leeds to London on the morning of this tryout. And I didn't have a bass. I just had I downloaded a piano app on my mobile phone, and I just charted them using the piano app to tell me what notes were where. So when I came in to do this gig, I mean, I just had loads of reams of paper with hieroglyphics written on them to try. And I turned up to do the gig, and it was just mental. It was this woman called Alex Zapak, who's a performance artist, and it was her. I got there really early because I had to get the first train from Leeds in the morning, so I was up at like 6 in the morning. Her and these 3 dancers, and the dancers were 3 really attractive young women who were stood on light boxes, and they were rehearsing these dance routines, and it was just bananas. And then we went in, and Kev and Matt, who's Iggy's drummer now, turned up to do the gig as well. And we kind of hit it off straight away, as musicians do. And we just had to figure out between Alex's vocals and what the dancers were doing, where we were going to go from one section of the song to the other. But it was chaotic. And then we turned up to do the gig. And the gig was in the Purple Turtle in Camden, which I told you anymore. But we turned up to do this gig, and we didn't know. Alex had made us dress up as priests, rock and roll priests with like dog collars. And she got carried to the stage on a crucifix by these 4 massive black guys, naked apart from being wrapped in see-through polythene. And that, so they stood this crucifix up on the stage, and Alex sort of fell off it and then went into the first song. And part of the set, the girls on the light boxes, this sounds made up, I promise it's not. The girls on the light boxes who were stood in the audience, they had this song about, I can't remember the name, it was something about vaginas smelling of fish. And they actually got fish, like actual fish, and were hitting people in the audience with these fish while we were trying to stay in time. It was just bananas, but really funny. Like, it was hilarious. It was one of those gigs that it just every moment was what the fuck. And the person on my side, Kevin on one side of the stage, I was on the other. And there was also this sort of black model that looked like Grace Jones, but done all up in bondage gear with a whip on my side of the stage. Like, and every so often she would just run about and crack the whip. So we were mucking about doing that and trying to play these songs in time. And I think the fact that, and Kev recorded it all, I think the fact that it actually sounded vaguely like a band. And that we managed to all sort of communicate through the chaos and keep this thing rolling along, this sort of juggernaut rolling along, and keep the songs to an all stop and start in the right place, which was the most you could hope for, really. Just made him think, oh, if I have to do any sort of chaotic gig, Ben would be a good shout for that. So that's why he gave me a shout for the Iggy gig, because a lot of that is just watching where he's going. And if he wants to go to the next section of the song, you can't take your eye off him. Then you go, you just follow the singer. And that was a very good sort of drive, a rehearsal for that sort of thing. So he gave me, so after that gig, I'd get together afterwards and still dressed up in these ridiculous priest outfits. And then went home the next day and we were all like, did that actually happen? Did it? And then about a year and a half later, he phoned me up and the phone call was funny. He just said, what are you doing on this date? It was something in June, it was about a year ahead. Are you free? And I was kind of like, yeah, Kev, for sure. No, I don't know if I could do that and wash my hair that night. And I didn't, and he couldn't tell me what it was, and I didn't know. And I remember trying, like, for about a week, I was trying to look up things that were happening on that date, and I couldn't figure it out. But if someone is booking you for something a year ahead, that it's a big deal. And all he said was, look, just save you're definitely going to want to do this. Just save the date, and I'll give you a call. When I've spoken to the manager and told them you're up for it, give us I'll give you a call and let you know what it is. And he phoned back a week later and he was like, oh, it's 2 dates, being a pickup band for Iggy Pop, and we're going to be supporting the Foo Fighters at Wembley Stadium. Those were the first gigs. And then and me and Matt, the drummer, got together and started sort of jamming along to some of the songs, and we videoed it. And then Kev sent the video to Iggy of what we were doing. And the whole idea was to bring the music back to what made the records sound really great. So to get Lust for Life not play, like, so a lot of the previous bands he'd played with in the 90s and the 90s were kind of a bit metal. They played all these songs like The Passenger and Lust for Life really fast, and we just wanted to play them with that swing. And so we did that, and Iggy really loved the videos we sent him. And then they started putting in a whole load more festivals. And funny enough, that gig in Wembley Stadium was a few weeks after Dave Grohl fell off that stage and broke his leg. So those gigs ended up getting postponed. We did them later on that year in Milton Keynes Bowl, which was even bigger, I think. It's like 80,000 people or something like that.
Wow.
But
I was at that gig.
The Milton Keynes one. Oh,
yeah,
man. Yeah. Oh, there you go. Yeah, that was one of those gigs. I mean, we do big gigs, but like 80,000 is just like as far as you can see. It's just heads like right to the very back. But that it was a bit of a relief that the first gig wasn't in our hometown. It was a Dutch festival called Down the Rabbit Hole. It was the first gig we did, and not like that would have been quite nerve-wracking, even for a hardened old sort of session player like me to do your first gig be at Wembley Stadium would have been like a lot. So it was good that got put back a little bit. But yeah, they ended up the first gig we did was some Dutch festival in a field somewhere on that. And that was the start of this whole journey of playing with Iggy for the last 6 years now. We've been doing that gig, so and just trying to get it better all the time and make him a happy chappy. So yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
That's been pretty cool going from listening to him in your mate's Mini to on stage with him.
Yeah.
Jesus, that's really cool.
I've never told that story to Jim actually, but I probably should at some point. He did the funniest thing he ever did on that gig, which was really beautiful. Was I think maybe in the second or third year of doing it, we did a show on my birthday in it's somewhere in Norway, and before the gig, like he normally comes and talks to us before every gig and says we'll do this and that, and between these songs keep it tight and whatnot. And before that gig, he didn't have anything to say to us because we'd done the gig 2 nights before, so we knew what we were doing. But he just kept kind of come up and looking at me going, sort of going, what's he so happy about today? Like, what's happened? Like, I don't know what he's so happy about. And then in the middle of this gig, where he introduced the band. He sometimes does, sometimes doesn't. That night he did. And he made the whole audience, like 50,000 Norwegians, sing "Happy Birthday" to me. And he got down on one knee and held my hand, kissed my hand, and it was just
that's excellent.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. You know that feeling when you're out with your parents and they make the whole pub sing "Happy Birthday" to you? It was like that times 100 with Iggy Pop standing there laughing at you while he's doing it. But that was, it's on Matt video. He's got a little camera behind his drums that captured the moment of him doing that, and it's one of those moments that he's such a nice man. Like he didn't have to do that at all, you know. And that was just because he wanted to make me feel a bit special that particular night. But he's a really super lovely guy to work with, and does things like that for his crew and band, you know, whenever the fancy takes him. So I'm very blessed to be doing that gig and to have even played with, you know, that guy whose songs I was loving, banging in the Mini. Yeah. 20 years before. Yeah. Yeah. That was amazing. Yeah.
So we over the last three podcasts, we've resurrected some questions which we used to have a list of questions. We kind of gave up on that through laziness and I don't know quite what, but there are a couple of questions which are kind of fun to have at the end of a podcast interview. They kind of go together. If you could say something to your younger self, what would it be? And if your younger self could say something to you now, what would it be?
Do you have to answer these as well, or is it just me?
It's just you. Just you.
Oh, I think you answer it. If I could say something to my younger self, it would just be, just keep going. Just keep doing it. And then if my younger self could say something to my older self, it would be the same thing. Just be like, keep going. Just keep doing it. Don't think about giving it up ever. It's too much fun. That would be both selves. I think we could both, my older and younger self, both agree on that. Yeah, definitely. What about yourself, Steve? Have you got the answers to this question for you? And you, Matt, I'd be interested in hearing both of you.
I've sidestepped thinking about it even because it's just such a weird thing to think about. Like when I was 19 I think I was 17 when I started playing the guitar. Through my stereo in my bedroom or something because I didn't have an amp. And you know, if I could see myself now and what I'm doing, probably I guess one thing that I would say to myself is you are allowed to enjoy it. Like, because you know what it's like. You kind of get mountaintop experiences, And then for most of the time, you're just grinding along, doing all the stuff that you have to do to, you know, see your amp being used in front of 80,000 people or something.
Yeah.
But all of that grind, it's, you know, you can still enjoy it. You don't need to be so serious about it. So I think, yeah, enjoy and appreciate what you've got. I think my younger self would say to my older self. What would I say to my younger self? Don't put constraints on your dreams, I think, you know, because I certainly did. I was like, well, you know, I can't. I started an aeronautical engineering degree and passed the first year, and I just didn't enjoy it at all. And I thought, well, I can't be a musician because I'm not good enough. So I'm going to be a sound engineer because at least I can train to do that and probably get a job doing that. And I wonder what would have happened if I had said, okay, well, I can play 3 chords reasonably well. You know, I've got pretty good rhythm because I was playing drums with 4 guitars. So just write some songs and get out there and, like you did, just get out there and start doing it and see what happens.
It worked for the Ramones.
So yeah, that off the top of my head, I guess those would be my answers. Now Matt has to answer.
Me?
Yeah.
I would say to my younger self that you've got to realize that most people don't know what they're doing. It's like you're always worrying about, you know, everybody seems to have it sorted and you think you don't. But most people are kind of winging it, you know. And the main thing is don't give 2 shits what anybody thinks. Just do what you want to do. That would be my 10 pennies to myself. My younger self told me to go and do one. No, my younger self would be like, I don't know. How old are you? Yeah, I would have some sarky thing, most probably, or be mildly disappointed that I, you know, wasn't some multi-platinum selling award-winning guitarist, but yeah, I don't know. Actually, you know, I'd be really impressed that I'd actually be able to survive working for myself. Proving that, you know, because that's one thing I didn't have. I didn't have any confidence in that at all when I was younger. I was really shy and yeah. So I mean, people wouldn't think of the amount I talk nowadays. I was completely different person, completely different. You know, given half a chance, I'd have hid under my bed covers. You know, but yeah. So weird worlds. Yeah.
No, it's a good feeling to be working for yourself, but the initial thing of going freelance is terrifying. Like, what next week comes and I can't eat.
No, but it's like the amount of people that have said to me over the years, "Oh, it must be so nice working for yourself. You can choose when to have time off. You can go on holiday. You don't have to answer to anyone." And it's just like, I do have a boss. It's me, and I'm an absolute arse. You worry if you've got too much work. It's just, that said, I would be a horrendous employee. I don't think I'd be very. Yeah. So long continue this, because otherwise I'm not getting a job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes to that. Yeah.
It is amazing. But yeah. Also, another thing we've started asking people is, what music are you listening to at the minute? And have you heard or stumbled across any hidden gems that you would like to share?
I have a list. Hang on. What have I done with it? I don't know where it's gone. Oh, no. So my bass student for today, I've just started. This is my first one that I've had for years. sent me a list of stuff to listen to. One of them was called Crumb, and Men I Trust. And what was the other band she liked? I've forgotten. But I thought they were really good, and it was quite nice to listen to young person music. It was quite good to hear what pop music young people are listening to nowadays. She's super cool. She plays plays bass in a band. But recently, to my shame, I actually made my girlfriend sit through a Bay City Rollers album the other day. Wow! Because we were talking about the song, the song they do Saturday night, SATURDAY night, and I thought it was one of the best songs ever, and I couldn't remember if the albums were absolutely awful or were quite good, and so we put an album on and we listened to it from beginning to end in a critical way. And they're sort of mixture of amazing and awful at the same time. It's sort of like they're like every sort of 60s band, but without the cool stuff. So it's sort of like it sounds a bit like the Beatles, but just sort of a bit more. If they dialed the rubbish up to like sort of 7.5, it's sort of like, or a bit like the Small Faces, but without Steve Marriott, or something like that. So I listened to that recently. And then what I tend to put on when I'm at home or after a gig or something like that, I listen to quite a lot of jazz. I'm getting really into Bitches Brew at the moment, which is the really sort of mental Miles Davis record, which I love. Yeah. And John Coltrane, I've been listening to quite a lot of John Coltrane. Yeah. I just love coming in from having to do a night where I've done a gig or something like that and sticking on a jazz record on a 33. I love it. It's great. That's really a happy moment for me when I get to do that. Yeah. So and also Kind of Blue, which is the first kind of like jazzy record that I've ever really bought. I just got it not a few months ago on vinyl. Man, I know this sounds like something that like an old dickhead would say, but it sounds so much better on vinyl. It really does sound amazing on vinyl, that album. It's just just put your feet up, cup of peppermint tea, Kind of Blue on a stereo. Oh, just winning, all kinds of winning.
My family can all hum most of Kind of Blue because that's the Friday evening record that I put on while I'm making pizza. So I have a Blue 50th anniversary copy on vinyl, which it's absolutely fantastic. And I don't know whether you saw in on our back episodes, but we have an interview with Erin Davis, who is Miles's son, which was like 6-7 episodes ago or something.
Amazing! I didn't notice that one. I'll check it out. That's so cool. What was he like? That must be what an interesting character.
He's really cool.
He's very cool.
How old was he when Miles took him on the road as like percussionist?
Like 19 or something.
And he had to take a percussion solo off. Oh God, who was it? It was another insane musician. It was literally like petrified all the time. Yeah. There's footage of him doing it, and doesn't he drop a tambourine or something?
Something like it's just it's awful, and you just feel like maybe the ground needs to swallow him up, or I bet he wished it had. But he's super cool. Just such a lovely guy.
I'll need to check that out. I saw you did one with the guy from XTC as well.
Yeah, Gregory.
That's really
that
cool.
was great. That was really interesting. Yeah. It's just really nice. I mean, and Matt and I are both very kind of genuinely self-deprecating in our ability to carry out these kind of interviews / conversations, but it's absolutely fascinating to have a long-form conversation with someone about their lives. Basically, you're getting an autobiography in concise and fairly specific parts of their autobiography, but it's just really, really interesting to see how people got to where they are.
Yeah, for sure. Especially people like the more sort of unconventional people that come from these weird punk or sort of more art school backgrounds and who have made this really weird and wacky music, like someone like Miles's son or like your man from XTC. And one of the bands I work with, Wire, like they come from a really strange place as well. And hearing like when they start talking about their experiences and how they formatively got together and made music. It's fascinating. It's really like so much of it sort of happened by accident and happens, you know, and it's just really cool to get a window into that world, especially if you like the music. You know, it's kind of like, oh, is that how that happened? Like, oh, you know, the stories of them being in the studio and stuff like that are amazing. I should intro you to Colin from Wire if you're looking for more contributors for this. He's quite
absolutely
an interesting.
Yeah,
I'll have a chat with him about it. Great, nice one.
Before we go, do you, because I know that he's production managed for Iggy before now, do you know Bill Ramey?
I haven't met him. No, I don't know him.
Okay, because I think he was working with Iggy when Iggy did that thing with Josh Homme, but I didn't know whether he'd done any other things.
He might have worked on that tour, because that was a different band that did all of the tour for that album were the studio musicians that worked with Josh on that project. So it's possible that was what he did with Iggy. The touring party that we go out with is a different group of people. So I haven't met him. They shared the same front of house engineer. Max Bisgrove did both of them, but we have a different tour manager that does Iggy's festival shows. So I haven't
because we did an interview with him two ago, I think. So it would have been funny if there was a degree of connection with you. Well, I guess there is, but via Iggy. But
so often there is with these people that you've worked with them on something or other at some point, and sometimes not even realised it. But yeah, no, I haven't had the pleasure. But that whole gang of people that tour with Iggy, I mean, they've been doing it for so long. And that in some ways they're like you're sort of really hard uncles, but then in other ways they have very big hearts, that whole bunch of people. So I'm sure that Bill is a really lovely guy, because they've got a very strict no dickhead rule on that, in that sort of touring party, which is, you know, they're nice. It's kind of a lot of tough love with those guys, and they're great. I'm really honoured to be on tour with them.
Wicked.
And you need that on tour, I think, as well, especially when you get a bit older. You just like going back to the same thing as before. You need some stability, and as what you were talking about, you know, always wanting to improve. If you're doing something wrong, you kind of want to know about it, and hopefully your ego is diminished enough to get slapped down if you're doing something stupid, and you're just like, well, okay, I wired the flipping voltage switch wrong.
I feel like you're gonna have one of those sort of you know, those recurrent nightmares when you wake up.
It's going to be Wembley Stadium, and there's just this like finger going to the power.
Oh man! And on that bombshell. Oh, Ben, but thank you so much for coming on and talking. I feel like we could carry on for ages. It's been amazing meeting you and hearing everything.
Absolute pleasure. Yeah. After all this nonsense is finished, it'd be really nice to go out and have a coffee or a drink with you guys sometime as well.
Definitely.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
We're gradually filling up our diary, but it's going to have to just like sliding door. Just like as a block move forwards until we're actually allowed to go out again. But we've definitely got to do that. We'll be in touch about amps and repairs and demos and all that stuff.
Amazing. I changed, you know, I was going to get the original valves for the SVT and go, I talked to the Ampeg guys and they were like, yeah, those are definitely the wrong ones that are in it. And I changed them yesterday. They came from Hot Rocks. They advised me to get these JJ valves. Man, it's so much better. It's just like suddenly way happier. It's
thank goodness.
Yeah, I turned it on and it was like I'm an SVT again.
Brilliant.
I'm so glad that I've got. Thank you so much for your help with that, Steve, because I don't think I would have had the confidence to go into the actual amp myself without chatting to you about it first. So it's been really helpful. Thank you for sharing your wisdom on that.
You're very, very welcome. Very welcome.
Yeah, I can't wait to get it, because I recently got one of the 70s cabinets from Iggy's stash of stuff. I'm going to get matey boy at Wembley Speakers to Paul to recone some of them, and then I'm going to do a little video with my 70s head and cabinet And Ampeg have lent me the new reissue one, and they're just delivering a new cabinet this week. So I'll stick that on YouTube. It should be quite a fun thing to do as well. So getting so nerdy. It's stuff to do in lockdown, isn't it?
Absolutely, nerd on, brother.
Yeah, learn how amplifiers sound good and how they don't sound so happy. It's all helpful. Yeah, amazing.
It's school day.
Yeah.
All right, man. We better sign off. But
yes.
Thanks again, buddy. It's been absolutely.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you on here, and looking forward to meeting you in real life as well.
And that's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Nice one, lads.
Take care, mate.